as many or most of you know, my dad died 3 weeks ago. I was able to get home just before, and then I stayed there a couple weeks and spent time with my brother and tried to put some things in order and organize a funeral, all those things that accompany death. And along the way I had this extraordinary few days. People appear, even on the street, who knew my dad. So everywhere I go, I'm engaged in this conversation about him. And there are these spontaneous moments of people standing on a street corner or standing in a lobby and telling stories. They're all just organically coming together around this one person, this one notion. And then it really comes to a head, of course, at a funeral. Everyone actually walks into a building and they sit and they face the same altar. And that experience has me thinking about what Sangha is, what it is historically, and how we think of it. There are two kind of traditional understandings of Sangha. I guess that's too small, but let's say two. One is the Sangha as a kind of abstraction. And a lot of the Vinayas rules for this Sangha, this imagined Sangha. And when we say that the Sangha is one of the three jewels, we imagine it in many cases as an abstraction. We don't necessarily see a particular Sangha in our mind when we say Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Some of us do. But in that grouping, it becomes something that's absolute instead of relative. It's a kind of perfect thing. And depending on the tradition you're in, maybe it's restricted to the monastic Sangha because that's the historical definition. Or maybe it's all practitioners, or maybe it's all of the world, maybe it's all beings. But in any case, we're able to hold it in a kind of pure way when we imagine it that way. And then there's the other way of understanding Sangha, which historically is just when people come together to practice. The Buddha told his monks to disperse, to go in the different directions, to not spend time with one another for certain times of the year, and then they would regroup. They would regroup at the full moon, and they would regroup for the rainy season. And when they regrouped, they formed a Sangha. And they couldn't all come back to the same place. So sometimes that Sangha that was formed for a day was 3 people. Dogen likes to say 3 is the number you need to make a monastery. And then sometimes that group was hundreds. Later in history it became thousands in China. That version is very alive. It's always changing. That's the Sangha of the present conditions. So I'm sitting there in this funeral, this lovely funeral, and I'm thinking how this too, this community of people, none of whom are Buddhist, just me and my brother, none of whom have a shared practice, but how this too is a Sangha. This too is a Sangha of present conditions. Everyone coming together with a shared purpose to honor or to remember. And what an honor it is to be part of that when you feel that happening. I read an article recently in which the author made a point of, he was talking about Sangha, and he said, Sangha is not just when you find people you like. It's not just the people you go to the club with. It's people who are holding you up in some way. They're supporting you in something. In that funeral, I could feel that. Everyone is holding everyone in their sadness and in their shared experience of this person. So the first thing I want to do is I want to offer that this third jewel is something we sometimes overlook. Not just in practice, not just in our communities, but every day. That there are people who are holding us up, and we have agreed to hold them up. If you march alongside people for that hour, for that afternoon, that's a Sangha. It's a perfect definition. If you join with people who have a shared creative purpose or a shared creative question, that's a Sangha. If you take a class with a group of people who are all wanting to learn and grow in the same ways, that's a Sangha. And if we recognize that, if we have that moment of looking up and saying, this is one of the jewels, this is one of the things, it's one of the Jenga pieces that we cannot take away, something shifts, I believe, and we treat that group differently. These aren't just our classmates anymore. They aren't just people walking down the street with us anymore. They aren't just our bandmates. They are one of the three pillars of this thing that we have taken up as a path to truth. Now, what does that look like? What does that look like in the moment? Some of it's just a recognition. Some of it is an acknowledgement of a shared duty, not just shared purpose, but looking across the room and recognizing this person, by their presence, is holding me up. I, by my presence, am holding that person up. I should start doing it actively. I should start to choose this. And then to notice that if we are calling something Sangha, then we are saying that it is inextricable from the Dharma. It is inextricable from the truth. It is inextricable from reality. And it is inextricable from the Buddha. We cannot separate it from awakening itself. It cannot be pulled away. And so whatever it is that you bring to this space, and maybe it's a little weird right now because we've been on Zoom for so long, but whatever you bring when you walk into that room with other practitioners, and you bow and people bow to you, and you smell the incense, and you see the flame, and there's that particular quiet of everyone just breathing. that quiet of knowing that there's a bell to come. That feeling suddenly is a feeling you can have almost everywhere. It wakes up in this room and in this room and in this room. Not just the one where people wear robes. Not just the ones that smell like sandalwood. So I want to offer that as just a kind of homework, as something to start to notice. That this is operating all the time. That's one. And then the other thing that I wanted to do is to point out how this works. Not just with Sangha, but with everything in this practice, which is to say that the reason we change when we think that something is Sangha is because now we're spiritualizing something. I just find this fascinating. And I thought I'd crack it open for a minute. Maybe we go to a class every Wednesday night. People who are learning to play guitar. And it's always just been a class. It's kind of fun. And then one day it occurs to us, oh, everyone here has a common purpose. This is a room of mutual support and care. It's a Sangha. And when we make that switch, we spiritualize that class. Now this class is important. Before it was fun. Before it was a nice thing to do on Wednesday. Now it has weight. It has spiritual weight. It has the gravity of the tradition. And so when we walk in, we feel differently. Maybe we even walk differently. We hold ourselves differently. We speak to each other differently. We do this with everything. We are in a tradition that spiritualizes something like generosity. Zen says generosity is important, so let's spiritualize generosity. Let's ritualize it, so that we bow as a ritual act of generosity. Right? So that when we receive things, we receive them as acknowledgements of generosity. So that we make offerings that no one else understands, of incense and flowers and water and words, all as embodiments of this idea of generosity, which we have decided is important, which we have decided has spiritual weight. We do this with something like Buddha nature. We do this with something like awakening. It's most of what the tradition is doing. We do this to kind of trick ourselves into showing up. It's very clever and very weird. And we all agree to it. And it works. And it's beautiful. And I don't point it out to say that it's silly, or to say that we should second guess ourselves. This isn't so that we stop halfway and say, oh, I'm doing that thing. No. It's a gift and we accept this gift, but we do it with the understanding, maybe just in the back of our minds, that part of agreeing to this process in which we take something completely normal and we make it something very special, is that if we do that for a long time, if we practice showing up for it in that way, over and over and over again, then eventually that thing that we made very, very special becomes very, very normal. And so we trick ourselves again. Today I'm talking about Sangha. I've got Sangha on my mind, partly because of the last few weeks in my hometown, and partly because I missed being here. I'm happy to play this trick. I also see that it's a trick. And I offer it up to you in hopes that it's of use. Thank you.